Today's project is a bunny Lovey. This one will work for all knitting machines and it's a free pattern. A couple of important notes before we start. I am going to be demonstrating the bulky version, and here it is with a human-sized baby doll. This uses worsted weight, otherwise known as number 4 yarn. On another gauge of machine, simply select an appropriate smooth yarn, follow the same instructions, and your Lovey will come out a bit smaller, that's all. Here I've used buttons and embroidery to create the face. It's cute, and it's perfectly fine to do it this way, as long as, if you're going to give it to an infant, you make sure that all the sewing is really secure. We do not want a choking hazard. If you have any questions about safety, draw in the features with indelible fabric marker, as I did in this project. In this one, the mouth and the whiskers are drawn in, the eyes and the nose are beads, but you can draw in everything. An infant won't care, and it is definitely safe. This is another free pattern, and I'll place a link for you in the program notes. Start out by knotting a loop in the yarn, but leaving a long tail. We'll use that for some seaming later. Cast on across 64 needles. Really, any presentable cast on is okay. I am chain stitching because it's going to show, or it may show depending on how you finish it, and I like the look of the chain stitched lower edge. Now thread the yarn into the carriage, set the row counter to 0, and knit 48 rows. If your machine will perform better with a comb or weights, definitely add those. You want the stitch dial set to make a fairly firm fabric using whatever yarn you have selected. I'm using a vintage Windtuck worsted weight yarn. It gets 4 stitches and 6 rows per inch at stitch size 6 on this SK150. When your 48 rows are complete, bind off 16 on the carriage side of the work. And by the way, if you wanted the blanket-like portion of the bunny to be longer, it would be perfectly okay to knit more than 48 rows. Knit across and bind off another 16. Here's the sketch I made myself to work from, and here's the point we've reached. We're now going to build in a gathering thread for the bunny's neck. To do that, first bring all the needles that are still in work forward and weave a sturdy piece of yarn over and under one needle at a time, over one, under one, all the way across. Make sure you leave a good long tail hanging at each end. You will notice I'm working with doubled yarn. I wasn't sure that my single was quite strong enough to perform the duty. Doubled won't hurt a thing. You'll also notice that my weaving yarn, gathering thread, is not the same color. It's a pale, pale pink. It really won't matter. It's not going to be noticeable. Set the carriage to knit back from hold and knit across. Now we'll move on to the head. We'll start the head with 12 plain rows. Now set the carriage so that it will hold. And on the side of the knitting away from the carriage, place 6 needles into hold. Knit across. Place 1 more needle next to those already in hold, into hold, and place 7 in hold on the side opposite the carriage. Knit across, place 1 more in hold, and now we're going to keep on knitting across to and fro. And after each row is knitted, we'll place the last needle that knitted into hold. This is very easy at first, but of course we're creating a longer pouch of knitting in the middle of the fabric than we are at the edges, so that pouch begins to rise up on the needles. You may use some claw weights to hold it down, just a fingertip to hold it down, or have your tool, that's my latch tool, helping me to hold it down. Use any technique that will keep the center fabric as it grows pulled down and out of the way so it doesn't drop stitches. That is the whole trick to short rowing. Finally, we'll put 1 needle into hold, and that will leave 3. Before knitting back, place 1 needle on the side away from the carriage, next to those that are already knitting, back into work before knitting across. And continue doing that as all of the needles return to work. This is called short rowing out. The process by which the rows got shorter and shorter is called short rowing in. When there are 7 needles in work on the left and 8 on the right, wrap the first held stitch on the left, return all of those on the right to work, and knit across. Set the carriage to knit back from hold and knit across to the left. Those needles will return to work, and now we will resume knitting the top of the head. That's 12 rows in all, including the first one where the needles on the left return to work. Now it's time to insert a gathering thread for the top of the head. So again, bring the needles all the way forward just as at the neck and weave over and under the needles manually, one over, one under. Remember to leave a significant yarn tail at each end. Knit across to the left and bind off 8 stitches. Knit across to the right and bind off another 8 stitches. Set the carriage so that it will hold again and place the half of the stitches, which is now 8, that are on the left away from the carriage into hold. We'll knit the first ear, 24 rows, only on the stitches on the right. That's also 8 stitches. Just as when short rowing, we have a pouch of yarn forming where the stitches are being held versus the ear that we're knitting. So keep that ear pulled down and make sure those hold needles stay firmly in hold while you knit your 24 rows. When they are complete, decrease 1 on each side and knit 1 row. Repeat that till you have knitted a row on only 2 stitches. Pick those 2 up on a needle, break the yarn or snip it, and pull the tail through. Now we're going to knit the second ear in the same manner. 24 rows, decrease 1 on each side, knit, decrease, knit, decrease, knit 1 row, and gather off the last 2 stitches on the yarn tail. Here you can see the rabbit's nose, his ears at the top, and we'll seam the back of his head together and the back of his body together. What I'm calling the body is the blanket-like or bottom part of the Lovey. My favorite way to seam things such as this is mattress stitch. If you have another favorite, that's totally fine. This will align with the center back of the rabbit's head eventually, so seam all the way up to where the first bind off occurred. Get a hold of both ends of that first gathering thread and pull it in as tightly as you possibly can. Knot it together at the ends and then tuck both ends down inside the blanket section. Most likely you still have some yarn and the yarn needle attached from sewing up the back. Now use that to gather the back portion of the Lovey section or blanket section and sew it to the gathered front section. The yarn tail and needle emerged from the center seam. So starting from there, work to one side and then work to the other side. And so the back to the already gathered front. It's okay to sew through the layers because we'll be stuffing the head and we need that to be secure. At the bottom of the head, we need it to be secure so that the stuffing will stay. Now, I'm still using mattress stitch, but use whatever you like to seam up the back of the head. Stuff the head with polyester fiber fill. Now we'll draw in the top of the head with the second gathering thread that we installed by weaving over and under. Make sure that fiber fill stays down inside, knot the gathering tightly, and then before it's completely inaccessible, poke those gathering threads down inside the head. Use the remainder of the sewing yarn that's still on its yarn needle to finish closing the top of the head and sew the base of each ear securely to the gathered area. When it's adequately secure, you can knot the yarn, poke it right into the head and out someplace else, and then snip it off flush with the fabric. Flatten out the blanket portion, the bottom portion of the rabbit, and sew the lower edges, both layers together. This is really optional. If you don't do it, the lower edges will roll, which looks okay, but it would be a good idea to go inside where you tucked all those yarn ends and neaten them up. Sew or draw on the bunny features and you're all set. You have made a new friend for your favorite tot. I have a book of written doll and stuffed animal and doll clothes patterns for machine knitters, in case you would like to make more things for kids. I will place a link to that in the program notes.